Sandra, you're on.
Okay, okay. Here I am. It is a very special welcome that I bring to you today because in some way Mike Fairbanks and I are joined at the hip. First of all, he was a colleague of my son's at Central High in Scranton. Second, I was a good friend of his dad, the late Matt Fairbanks, who taught philosophy at the university. Mike and I saw each other after a long gap when he received an honorary degree here in Scranton at the University of Scranton in 2006. Mike was then working in several African countries at the presidential level, promoting economic skills, where I had been working in various countries, including our own, to strengthen people's civic skills. He proposed our working together, bringing economic and civic education to countries that had been colonies in the past, struggling to become democracies. It's a story for another time. It's a long story. Mike's creativity is endless. He blends ideas with actions, and most important, he uses his economic skills and ingenuity for the good of others. He attributes his temperament and mindset to his Jesuit education at this University of Scranton. Today, he will help us to understand his work on integrative thinking in biotechnology, fighting tuberculosis, and economics, eradicating poverty. Please welcome him to the podium, remote though it is. Mike?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Sandra. Hi, everybody. I see a lot of friendly faces. Hi, Tim Pryle. How are you? Nice to see you. When your face came up, I waved to you, and then I realized people can't discern who you're waving to. And I see Gus Fahey. I don't want to embarrass him, but I used to babysit for Gus back in the late 70s. Looks like he turned out okay anyway. And Dr. Fahey and Rosemary, nice to see you all. Maury Myers. Okay, well, this will be really fun because the last time I spoke at this forum, I announced for the first time that we were going to start a new company called Akagera Medicines with a brand new approach to fight tuberculosis. And so I'm anxious to give you an update on that because it's moved forward. But it's kind of the key takeaway from the whole presentation. So I'm going to let it go a little bit towards the end. I do have the fun experience of reflecting back on my education 40 years ago and what it meant to study science and philosophy and how I carried it forward. And as I go out around and I meet investors and I meet people who've achieved a lot, I find that philosophy majors are overrepresented as chief executives of companies and leaders in government and the academy. I also find that people who have a Jesuit education are overrepresented. And when I have the nice experience of finding these people, we bond very, very quickly. And we have these very fun and interesting discussions about what the Jesuit education meant to us. And I don't frame these discussions this way just for a Jesuit audience. I really do talk this way all the time in almost any forum that I find myself. So first of all, I make a couple of definitions. You know, what's a Jesuit education? It means, I'm going to give it one word in a minute, but it means having a well-rounded education, a passion for knowledge, but most importantly, to be unapologetic for the impact you intend to have. And I find that people who have a Jesuit education, their goals are often bigger than themselves. I'm a fellow at Harvard, I'm a fellow at Stanford, I went to Columbia University for graduate school. And I have to say that most people I meet in these environments are kind of out for themselves. Their goal is how they can be somebody or how they can be more important or how they can be more wealthy. But when your goal is yourself, the team that's prepared to back you up is pretty small. So it creates a very interesting kind of a person. Sometimes when you think about the Jesuit education, you think about scholarship and service, and how they're always put together, scholarship and service. And if you have the service part of it, the goal is bigger than you, and then people are willing to be guided by you, and that improves the chance that you'll actually achieve that goal. And I'm hoping to give a specific case study about that in a few minutes. The other term that requires definition is what it means to be Catholic. Because a lot of us think, well, what it means to be Catholic is to have been an altar boy like me, or to have gone to Nativity Catholic school in the South Side. It means to, go through the sacraments of baptism and communion and confirmation. But a lot of people don't know that there's another definition of what it means to be Catholic. Catholic means to be broad-minded. It means to be a natural integrator of ideas. It means to be well-rounded. It means to, always be open to new experiences and to new learning. And sometimes I think as part of our branding proposition at the University of Scranton, we should be focused on the two definitions of what it means to be Catholic, because the second one is almost as compelling as the first one. The third definition I want to talk about is integration or integrative thinking, which is part of the title today. So integration is taking the tools and the insights from one domain and applying it to the challenges of another. So if you go to Penn State and you just major in business and accounting, you take a lot of business and accounting. If you're educated in England, you kind of declare your specialty right out of high school, right out of your A-level exams. And if you're going to be a doctor, you just do medicine from then on, and they're incredibly specialized. But at the University of Scranton, you have to take philosophy, you have to take theology. In fact, at least in my time, and it's probably still the same, is you get the equivalent of a minor in those specialties together with what you're doing. So it forces you to write, it forces you to think, it forces you to speak. And there was a very early emphasis on integrative learning at the University of Scranton. I think it must have been before most colleges, where you could take a class that was half philosophy and half physics, for example. And I see that Dr. Paul Fahey is here. He used to teach a course with my dad, where my dad would teach the philosophy and Dr. Fahey would teach the physics part of it. That was integrative learning. That was integrative thinking. I saw Dr. Fahey at my dad's memorial, and he said, I was so rapt with attention, always going to your dad's end of the class and always listening to what he had to say. But then he reminded me that my father never once showed up for one of the physics lectures. So my dad was happy to be an integrative teacher, but maybe didn't practice the other side of it as much as some. But those were formative experiences for me, because my way of thinking never said there's just philosophy, there's just accounting, there's just chemistry. And if you double click on chemistry, there's just inorganic chemistry or organic chemistry or physical chemistry. That to be an intelligent person was to take things apart and then go over here and put them back together again in a totally different way. And that kind of integrative thinking, I have a feeling, I can't document this, I have a feeling the Jesuits have been thinking this way for a really long time. And they probably had to. As religious specialists and scholars, they had to teach chemistry, they had to teach business, they had to teach English literature. And so they naturally were forced into examining their own theology, their own way of thinking through many different filters. And they had to pass that along. And whether they were doing it consciously or unconsciously, I think it created generations of integrative thinkers. So one of the things you have to do to be Jesuit educated, as I mentioned, is make your goals bigger than yourself so that other people are willing to be guided by you. The greatest skill in life is getting other people willing to be guided by you, especially in the service of some special goal. And then while you're doing that, to understand the values, the attitudes, the beliefs, the goals, the assumptions about the world that inform that approach. And most importantly, then, to be eloquent about those values and those assumptions. If you can write really well, if you can speak really well, if you can do integrative thinking very well, then people are going to be willing to be guided by you. So I want to give two interesting examples, I think, one from development economics and the other from biotechnology. And these are two fields that I've worked hard in the last 4 decades. And I want to relate these two fields back to the Jesuit education, the Catholic thinking, the integrative approach, okay? So the first one is economic development. I, have been able to debate the greatest economists in the world, and I only took 2 economics classes at the University of Scranton. But I got on the stages with them on television, documentary films, Harvard, all kinds of places. And I debated them because I never spoke solely about economics. I took the fields of sociology, the field of business strategy, the field of anthropology, and I began to create a model of how to create change and improve prosperity, especially in poor countries, that wasn't confined to just the field of macroeconomics. In fact, I used to joke with Jeff Sachs and Joe Stiglitz and all these famous people, Nobel laureates and heads of the World Bank, that I could figure out if a country was going to succeed better than they could, because all they were going to look at was trade deficits, exchange rates, the rate of new business formation. But I could ask 3 or 4 questions of people around the country, and I would know where their country was going. I would want to know, do they have optimism about the future? Do they tend to spontaneously socialize and trust with their fellow citizens? Do they believe in competition as a force for positive change that spurs innovation? I wanted to know, did they revere the past at the expense of the future? I wanted to know those things, because if I knew what was in people's hearts and in their minds, I knew how they would develop their economy. So I used to argue that what economists were doing was studying the scoreboard. They're saying, well, here's the scoreboard. And I was saying, yeah, but I know how to put points on the board. I know how to create the teams that'll overcome the defense and cross the goal line. I know how people are thinking. And that's how we should be developing policies. So one of the questions I ask is, what is prosperity? And a traditional economist will tell you that it's the gross national product, maybe divided by the number of people in the population, some measure of productivity. But I found out that there were really 7 types of capital, 7 types of prosperity, many of which traditional people were overlooking. There was the basic factors in an economy, like the location, the sunshine, the subsoil assets. And economists understand these things very well. But then there's also the financial sources, the monetary, the velocity of money, how much currency, what the exchange rate is. And then there's the kind of humanly made capital, like buildings and roads and ports and telecom systems. These things economists are pretty good at because they're easy to see and they're easy to measure. But there's a bunch of things that are hard to see and difficult to measure that most economists overlook. And think about this in our own country, the quality of our institutions, of democracy, the clusters of related and supporting industries that come together to support each other. So institutional capital. Then there's knowledge capital, archives of information and patents. Human capital, like the skills and abilities, which are really hard to measure or to understand, but just as important as a road, just as important as a currency. And then finally, the one that nobody really thinks about as a kind of capital, and that's culture capital, the attitudes and beliefs and assumptions about the world. And what you find with cultural capital is it's probably the most important one, because it's the one that teaches you how to attach meaning to the other 6. So I developed this framework of the 7 forms of capital, and I began to advise people, and I got to advise Nelson Mandela, and got to know him very well, to the point where I would write speeches for him and he would get tired and he would lie down on the couch and take a nap. And I would sit there watching Nelson Mandela nap while I'd be writing words that he would say to the world the next day. I can remember one occasion wandering around his house bored and going into his bathroom, seeing all the awards and the paintings and the statues that he'd been given from Russia to Bolivia to, everywhere else in the world. And I walked into his bathroom and I went, oh my God, this guy is human. He's not a god. He's not a superhuman. He's a human, because I picked up his Colgate toothpaste and the toothpaste tube was squeezed in the middle of the tube. And I knew this guy does have a flaw after all. He's a normal guy. And I even wrote in one of my books, Mandela squeezes toothpaste mid-tube, because I wanted people to know he's a regular guy, a very nice man, a very humorous man, always very punctual, always super respectful, exactly the way that you would want him to be. With Fidel Castro, I only got to meet him in the middle of the night. I would fly to Mexico, then Venezuela, and I would use my Irish passport and spend British pounds, and I would come into Cuba so no one would know I was there. And I would stay in an old sugar plantation house, and he would call for me to come and visit between midnight and 2 a.m. in his office. So no one knew that I was there. And his entire cabinet would be there. And I had all these little speeches that I've been giving all over the world. And I decided I'm going to give him this one speech. And I talked about the 6 types of government management that exists, pro-export management and monetarist management. And when I got to the final one, it was 2 a.m. I'm exhausted and I'm just working off my sort of canned remarks from every other place. And I started criticizing classic socialism. And I said, there's only 2 places in the world that still practice truly classic socialism. And all of a sudden I got scared and my heart started pounding in my chest. I started to get hives. I started to sweat because I realized I'm in the one of the 2 places that does classic socialism, and I'm criticizing it. I'm in Fidel Castro's office with his entire cabinet there, and no one knows I'm there. And I finished the speech, and he and his vice president, a man named Carlos Laje, and his foreign minister, Roberto Robaina, who's an artist in Madrid now, they all 3 came up to me and they said, we just want to thank you for being really honest about how you see things. And I had to stop doing my work there because I don't know if you remember this, in the late 90s, all the Miami Cubans were buzzing around Cuba in their small 2- and 4-seater aircraft, and Fidel shot them down and killed them. And then all of a sudden, there was no way for me to go back there. And so that was kind of the end of the relationship. Although, as an interesting aside, I was the first person outside of Cuba to learn that Fidel had cancer and was going to die from it. And it was a very interesting experience in itself. So let's do another definition. Why does prosperity matter? Why does it matter? It's not just that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and there's a gap and there's a problem. Prosperity is not just the shelter and the nutrition and the medical care that you provide to your children. Prosperity enables hopes and aspirations. It gives you optimism. High and rising wages in countries that are very poor is incredibly highly correlated with civic engagement and with trusting your fellow human beings and with deep respect for hierarchy, both above you and below. And so what I used to argue was that if we could get wages up through an export-led strategy, we could strengthen your society. We could make it stronger. Now, I've been working in Rwanda now for 20 years. And I became the closest advisor to President Kagame there 6 weeks after he became president in April of 2000. And in that time, Kagame, with very little help from anybody else, has delivered 3 million people out of poverty. His parliament, 2/3 of his parliament is women, which is the highest percentage in the world. And he has set the world's record for the reduction in infant mortality. But that's not even what you see when you go there. The skyline of Kigali looks like Abu Dhabi now. And you can't go anywhere in the country without, and look anywhere you want. You won't find a cigarette butt, a mango peel, or a piece of paper on the ground in the entire country. It doesn't exist. Because on the fourth Saturday of every month, the entire citizenry comes out and they pick up the garbage, they remove debris from water sources, and they plant trees. And it's called Umuganda. Sandra knows these things very well. Umuganda is the national effort of coming out and cleaning your country. So therefore, nobody throws things on the ground because they're just going to have to pick it up next Saturday. And if you're walking down the street on that Umuganda Saturday morning, someone will stop you and say, why aren't you tidying up things? They'll stop you and say, why aren't you planting a tree? You know, it's quite an incredible experience. What is the secret to Rwanda's success of getting 8% economic growth every year for 20 years and becoming virtually incorruptible society? What's the secret? They understood that taking traditional values and turning them into modern institutions rather than listening to people from the World Bank or Harvard or the IMF was the way forward. They had this integrative approach that this doesn't start with top-down policies, it starts with values and attitudes. And if we can get the values right, we'll build the institutions, because institutions are the children of the culture. So they have this very interesting approach that we don't have in America because our economists and our policymakers aren't trained in integrative thinking. Not enough of them went to Jesuit schools. It's another way to put it. So it's very, very interesting that in this place that was a portal into human reality that was basically hell, where 1 million people were killed by hand over 100 days, is now one of the most liberal, fastest growing and happiest places on earth. And it's not a coincidence, because they were able to galvanize the society, you know, from that crisis and turn it into something exciting. So integrative thinking, you know, how values impact policies, how policies impact outcomes, that kind of integrative approach is the way that all of our policies have to go forward, you know, from now on. Let's talk about biotechnology and Akagera Medicines for a minute. So the last time I was at the forum, I said, what I'm going to try to do is raise some money and try to fight tuberculosis in a different way, because I had a new idea. I had seen a presentation of cancer specialists talking about a possible new treatment for second-line pancreatic cancer. And all of us know that pancreatic cancer is a death sentence. You know, if you get by the time you get diagnosed, you're in stage 3 or stage 4, because there's no nerve endings in the pancreas. So you don't know you're sick until it's too late. So I was watching this presentation by these medical people in Boston, and they'd found a new approach where they took this toxic molecule and they put it inside of a liposome. And the liposome is a bilipid layer. I know Dr. Fahey did very early research on this. I'm going to guess back in the 60s and 70s. It was a long time ago. Well, they took this toxic molecule, put it in the liposome, and then they put, through an intravenous experience, they put it in the body and they charged the liposome so it would only be attracted to the cancer tumor. And it turned out to work very, very well. So now it's FDA approved. I was an early investor in this. A lot of people, you know, were very interested in this. And we sold this molecule to Ipsen for $1.1 billion. So when I heard this presentation, I said, well, wait a minute. Tuberculosis is the greatest killer in human history. 1 out of every 7 people who ever lived died from TB. And 1 out of every 4 people in North America in the 19th century died from TB. And even up into the 20th century, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt and all these people, they died from tuberculosis. Nelson Mandela almost died from tuberculosis. So I said the granuloma that protects the TB mycobacterium is kind of like a tumor. Could we put, and when we try to kill TB, we use such a powerful drug that it ends up creating terrible side effects, and people often have to stop using it. So a lot of chemistry, a lot of medical treatment is, can we kill the bad thing before we kill the patient? That's a lot of the trade-off. So I said, can we take something that kills the TB, put it in some kind of liposome and attach it to the granuloma inside the lung and kill the TB that way? Now this, I didn't think of it at the time, but this was integrative thinking, because I was seeing something in one domain of science and wondering if I could apply it to another. The scientists encouraged me that this could happen. So I went out to the big pharmas looking for money and support, but they were all running away from it because TB is only a poor man's disease now. You don't find it much in America. You don't find it much in Europe. But in Russia, China, India, Africa, it's everywhere. And 10 million people a year get it, and 2 million die from it, including 400,000 children. So it's like getting the entire global COVID pandemic every single year. And yet nobody does anything about it. The big global pharmaceuticals have flown away from the market because 48 out of the 50 jurisdictions in the world that get the worst TB have no insurance to cover it. So I said, well, here's a problem worth solving. It's a problem of poverty. It's a problem of science. It's a problem of getting people willing to be guided in a very certain direction. And it requires a new type of science. So when I couldn't raise the money from the normal sources, I went to the president of Rwanda and I explained the situation. And he said, how much money do you need? And I said, we're going to need about $200 million. We could start with 6 million and see if we can get proof that this works. And then we'll need 25 million to start putting it into human trials. So he gave me the $6 million. And we started the company called Akagera Medicines.
Alert from Dropbox.
Oops, sorry. We started the company called Akagera Medicines, and Akagera is the river that is the source of the Nile that starts in Rwanda. It's the source of all the wealth and all the prosperity and all the fertility of East and North Africa, but it starts in Rwanda, a little bit in Burundi. And Akagera, so we called it Akagera Medicines, and we started to build a team. We registered the company in Delaware so that other people would be willing to do business with us. We opened up laboratories in San Francisco and in Boston. And on January 16th of this year, just 3 or 4 months ago, we obtained a complete preclinical proof that the drug works. We have 10 times the improvement in the efficacy. We have we can produce the drug 30% cheaper than the current standard of care. We can shorten the duration of treatment from up to 12 months down to between 2 and 3 months. And instead of daily tablets that often make people sick, it's be 1 injection every 2 weeks. And this is the really remarkable part, with 0 toxicity, no toxicity at all. So that this not only works in regular TB, it works in multi-drug resistant TB, and it's going to work in latent TB as well. So now we're halfway through raising the $25 million round to take us into human trials next year. And it's a very exciting proposition. Analysts have just done an outside study of us, and they took our initial valuation from $15 million to now the company's worth $126 million. And this is before we've even got the phase 1 completed. What I'm trying to say with this case study is the kinds of things that the Jesuits and this Catholic thinking teach you, which is to jump in over your head, take ideas and tools from one domain and apply it to another, right? To try to make your own personal goals bigger than you so that other people will be willing to be guided by you as you move in this direction. Those are exactly the principles that have created this company. Now we're a long way from, being a big success. We've got years ahead of us, that long time frame. But right now, the betting money is that we have the best standard of care in the world, and that we're going to end up achieving our goals. Now, when you start to think about this, I studied biochemistry at the University of Scranton. I studied philosophy, but I also had all these other courses. I think we called them interdisciplinary courses back then. That was just Jesuit code for integrative thinking. The Jesuit focus on writing well, on speaking well, on character, on passion, far more important than getting straight A's in a business major, straight A's in a chemistry major. The thing which was a constant part of the dialogue in my house, for sure, and at the university all the time, were very, very important to enabling someone to think differently, So when you meet people that go, I'll call them to non-Jesuit universities for a second, I find a higher percentage of them are looking for occupational status, material gain, even fame. And when you come out of the University of Scranton, you'd be vaguely embarrassed to talk that way. Like there might be people who still think that way. They would never utter it in the hallways. They would never talk about it that way. But at Harvard Business School, that's all they talk about. That's exactly what they talk about, And I find that people from these elite institutions, I know them very well. I've been a professor at Harvard, a professor at Georgetown, a professor at Tufts. I know them all very well. I published my books at Harvard Business School. It's shocking to the Jesuitical ear to hear them talk the way they talk, because you think, I'm never going to help you do anything. Like, why would I help you get down the path of where you want to go? And it sounds bizarre. I'm 63 years old now. It sounds bizarre to even hear them think, even after all these decades. So that's the difference. I'm quite sure about it. Integrative thinking, interdisciplinary training, the passion, the moral character, being eloquent about your values and what you're trying to do, not just the scholarship, but the service, and getting the leverage to accomplish something great because people are willing to be guided by you because of your eloquence about those important values. That's what's different. I'm quite sure about this. And I wish there were some students here because I know a lot of them. I remember them. They'd be saying, we'd be sitting in a theology class. I remember this as like it was yesterday, Dr. Benestat, and they'd say, I just want to learn accounting and get a job. And then me having a big mouth even then, I turn to them and I go, well, you're not exactly a pleasure having you in this class for me either. If you want to study accounting, go study accounting and quit bothering us. That's what I would say. I had who was the speech professor, the balding guy who was so funny. He used to slam his thing down. Do you guys remember the speech professor? Oh, I'm embarrassed. I can't remember his name. He stopped me in the hall one day and he said, Mike, I love you like a son, but please don't take another class from me, because I would be picking on the other students who would say things like that. But now I feel vindicated. you know, the Jesuit education. It wasn't clear to me then what we were trying to accomplish. It felt right. I knew I was in the right place, but it took me a whole lifetime to truly value what it gave me. And it was a set of values that forced the integrative thinking, forced the big goal, forced you to improve your eloquence in writing and speaking, so that you could get people willing to be guided by you and accomplish something even better. So I hope that is coherent and sounds right to you. And maybe I'll end it there and see if there's any comments. So. And there's Dr. Norberg too. It's another family I babysat for. So I think everyone's muted. Sandra's got her hand up.
Yeah. So I was not educated by the Jesuits, although I know a lot of Jesuits. I think I got much of my the insights into not just doing things for yourself from the humanities. So let's say my humanities are your Jesuit learning. And they come together in some very nice places at the university, as you know. But for me, that affected the way that I think and feel and act. And I just wonder if others might have that opinion, or what you think about that.
I'd be glad to hear from others.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's right. I'm sure that's right. I often wonder out loud why it burned in me to leave Scranton and join the Peace Corps and go the way that I went, when so many of my friends stayed back. And the answer was clearly the literary figures, historical figures, religious figures I was reading about. It was clearly, I've got to go see what they're talking about. Some of them were deeply flawed individuals who wrote about the world beautifully, like Hemingway, but others were James Joyce. I remember a very particular reflection in Dr. Steve Ryan's class. He was very mad at us because we could never understand Irish literature as well as he. And he had been taught by a great scholar in Ireland at Trinity College named Dennis Donahue. I remember this so vividly. And he looked at us when we were studying the portrait of an artist as a young man. And in the last page, the protagonist is looking across the Irish Sea. And he said, "What's going on here? What's going on?" And everyone's like, "Well, he's on the shore. He's looking at the water." No, what's going on here? Well, he wants to get out of there. No, what's going on there? And I sheepishly raised my hand and I said, "Well, he's so Catholic. Maybe the water is his baptism into a new life." And he went, "Exactly. That's perfect. Yes, that's what's happening." And I went, "Oh." And so I never been so encouraged at the university in my whole life. So I remember it very well. And it was the symbolism of the water that Steve Ryan wanted us to get. He wanted us to integrate Catholicism and peasantness and symbolism and literature and put it all together. And what really happened is he looked at the water. It's like a baptism. It's, yes, I don't think those discussions go on in every university the way that they should.
I have a comment and a question, if I may. I'm a graduate of Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And as you probably know, that is run by the Holy Ghost Fathers. And much of what you've talked about, I experienced there. I was a math major, but I had to take all the interdisciplinary or perhaps integrative subjects, including religion, all 4 years.
And you loved every minute of it, I can tell.
I did. I actually attribute that experience to my success later on because of that. And I grew up in the Catholic Church. I went to an Irish Catholic, Roman Catholic elementary school outside of Pittsburgh. And those were the days when every Catholic church had its own denomination. And my grandmother used to say, if you go to the Italian Catholic Church, you have not heard Mass. Because Scranton was the same way. Everything was all broken up into the denominations. But what Duquesne University did, and most of my teachers were the priests, is that it broadened that whole experience about what it means to be a Catholic. And so I've cherish that to this day. Anyway, I really enjoyed your comments very much, and I thank you. My quick question is, have you applied, I'm sure you have, your model regarding capital to this country currently? And what's your assessment?
Yeah, no, I get that question everywhere I go. So let's do a little meta-analysis. Again, meta-analysis, right? It's kind of a statistics term. Anthropologists would call it pile sorting. Every domain has its own name for it, but it's a way to get on top of the data and extrapolate, extract new type of knowledge. The 7 forms of capital are my meta-analysis of what's going on in any city, region, or country. In the old days, America was almost entirely driven by those lower forms of capital, right? Basic factors like timber and rivers and things like that, the movement of money and the development of roads and ports and bridges and things like that. So you would take something out of the ground, ship it down a road, get some money for it, go back and get more stuff out of the ground. America grew off those lower forms of capital. But it did something smart. It took what economists will call the rent from that process, and it invested in the higher forms of capital, institutions that made sense, educational institutions, democracy, industrial parks, things like that. It also invested it in people at a very high rate, and it invested it in knowledge for its own sake. And that's where, things came out of the Panama Canal that came into our economy. Things came out of the NASA space program that came into our economy. We invested in knowledge for its own sake. So we took the rent from the lower form of capital, we invested in the higher forms of capital, and then innovation occurred at a very high rate. That process has now been stalled. It's been stalled for lots of reasons, but the most important one is a lack of vision, a lack of understanding that innovation comes from the higher forms of capital, which are hard to see and hard to measure, but is where real wages, high rising wages come from. And when wages are increasing, people's sense of competency and happiness and good feeling towards their fellow citizens goes up, and it strengthens our society. But now, when Donald Trump says things like we're going back to coal, he's saying, well, that's a lower form of capital thing, right? And so what happens is the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the trust, the spontaneous sociability that Francis Fukuyama calls it, or Larry Harrison, the so-called radius of trust, these things shrink. And then you're forced into, tribalistic behavior, associating yourself with like-minded people and moving into tribes. So the vision is not there. Now, I don't blame Republicans or Democrats more than each other, right? The Republicans opened up the economy, and the Democrats, protected teachers' unions and schools, and there was sort of a dumbing down of the citizenry. If only one of them had done this thing, we'd be okay. But they almost collaborated in our demise of not skilling up our population whilst opening us up to global competition. So all the productive assets move off of shore, and only the people who are symbolic analysts who can move things on a computer are the only ones who succeed, and the average man can't succeed. So there was a collaboration in the demise of the country because no one understood that building prosperity is a very complex integration. It's not about the linear process of a specific policy that creates a specific outcome, and then they fight about that. No, it's cultural, it's institutional, it's human skills and capabilities, it's what's our knowledge base. We don't understand how prosperity is really created, so we're not doing the right things. And Biden is a great and decent person, but he doesn't comprehend this. And Trump, of course, didn't get anything right in this regard. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
It's Maggie Mariotti, and Michael's mother taught both Patty Hannon and myself at Nativity. So my question really was Biden related. I was really going to ask you if you had had a chance to consult him, or if there's the connector there for you to be able to talk to him. Random guy.
There's some connections. I've never met him. Obama offered me a position high in the administration. I turned it down. Bush before him offered me an opportunity, and I've been offered, the leadership positions at various multilateral banks. I'm not good in those environments of the bureaucracy and policy and the politics. I recognized a long time ago, I'm better as a advisor to people who really want to cause change in poor countries, and I'm better as an entrepreneur. Now that said, Biden has around him several people that I trained, that worked for me for years, that I hired out of Yale or Bryn Mawr or one of these places and trained them up. The latest one was just announced yesterday. Marcela Escobar Rose is now the new head of Latin America for USAID, the bilateral aid agency. And she was my assistant for a decade. So I do have those. I have some of those contacts who are now in the administration, and I hope will bring these kind of views to them. But no, I don't have a direct relationship.
Allison, can you hear me?
Hi, Maury.
Hi, Mike. My question to you is, what was incorporated in your Catholic Jesuit education on other faiths, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, or other faithless efforts, atheism or agnosticism?
I want to make sure I understand.
Did you, did your consequence of a serious educational experience include reflection on those things that I've just identified, other faiths?
I had the occasional course in other religions, but my own experience is having worked in China and Russia, having worked in Africa for 40 years now, where everyone will say they're Christian, but they're really animists. They really believe in the divine beings that live in the brook more than they do in the Holy Trinity, for example. And then going to Latin America, where everyone is so profoundly Catholic, or at least until recently, profoundly Catholic. And so working in those environments, I've learned a lot from the people there, and the symbolism that you require in order to communicate with them on these important ideas. Sometimes it's hard, like when you're in Latin America. I lived in Bogota for 7 years, and one of the hardest things was that the very deep belief that rich people don't get to go to heaven. Easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than a rich man into heaven. It's a profound and present part of their the way that they think. And so here I am. My explicit purpose working for President Gaviria, President Samper, President, forgetting the guy after him, working for these guys was, how do you talk about getting wages to go up when the peasants, the campesino, believes that in their heart that this is a bad thing. And so as I started to examine the sociology of prosperity and realize that economists stop at gross national product divided by the population, and the sociologists and the anthropologists take up the discussion about what this does to a society. So I would start focusing on the work of Alex Inkelis or Ron Engelhardt, and how they saw a connection in 43 poor countries around the world, that from zero to a purchasing power of $5,000, society strengthened. So I would make the argument that if we want to be optimistic about our future, if we want to build trust between us, if we want to have respect towards our leaders, but also treat our subordinates properly, we needed to get wages up, because that got people out of their survival stride where they were worried about shelter, nutrition, medical care for their children. So I would make the argument that way. And I would often use religious and literary symbols. One of the things I did in Colombia was use, the work of Garcia Marquez in his book, 100 Years of Solitude. And when, even in my books, I quote Garcia Marquez, where he would talk about, the person who would bring ice, the first person to bring ice to the village, the first person to bring a lighter to a village. And I would compare myself to that person, where, 100 years ago, people brought ice from the ponds around Boston to the villages of Colombia. Well, I'm bringing business strategy. I'm bringing a new type of economics. I'm bringing a new way to think about it. And then people would laugh as Michael Fairbanks would compare himself to Melquiades, who was this wizard with bringing new things to the villages. So I would find ways of using their magic realism, their symbolism, their Christian symbols, but I would be inflexible on the idea that what I was bringing them, I thought, were the tools they needed to improve their economy. So I hope that's responsive to your question. You could never be the type of advisor that throws ideas over the transom. And when you're selling a project, you say, oh, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to build your and then when it doesn't work, you say, well, it's all your fault because you're peasants and you're superstitious and you're corrupt. And you can't be over responsible in the selling process and under responsible at the outcome. So I tried to be under responsible in the selling process, and then share the responsibility towards the end. And that was culture by culture. When I worked in Tatarstan, which was a semi-autonomous part of the Soviet Union and Russia, from my very first day, I was called a CIA spy. There was even a headline, which I have somewhere here in my office, how Clinton, Bush, and Fairbanks are trying to destroy our country. And besides being honored to be in that headline, I got really scared because Clinton and Bush weren't in Tatarstan at the time, only I was. And so it made it very uncomfortable for a while. But I found ways to take their symbolism and their culture and certain words and apply them to what we were doing. There's a word in Russian called Rodina, R-O-D-I-N-A. And it means the motherland, but it's a much more profound word to them than motherland is to us. So if you invoke it in any speech, it creates a mood of reverence. So I wouldn't talk about building their economy or export-led growth. I talk about serving the motherland. And when I put it into that context, it improved their receptivity. It at least showed them that I was trying to understand the way that they thought. So, and again, I don't think someone trained in the vertical domain of economics at an elite institution ever gets there. I think when you come out of Harvard College, or with due respect to Maury, you come out of Yale College, sometimes you you go to these places and you think you hold the truth in your hand, and it's up to you to just convey it. If they accept it, great. If they don't, they don't. But when you come out of Scranton, you with due respect to everyone here, you better be a little bit modest about yourself. You better be a little bit, quiet, and you better kind of sneak up on them. If you go in there and start blowing, your own horn, they're not gonna believe it, and they're gonna shut you down. So
Mike, I learned the truth when I got married.
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a humbling experience for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't care about your fancy degrees. Take the damn garbage out. So, yeah. So anyway, I hope that's a little bit responsive.
Well,
more.
what I really want to ask is, did you, in the course of your studies and benefiting from the Catholic Jesuit education, come to acknowledge or recognize that there is a commonality of mission and purpose in so many other faiths?
Yeah. I think, thank you for making that more specific. There's no doubt in my mind that human nature is evenly spread. The talent and abilities are evenly spread. The smartest person I ever met was a student of mine in the Peace Corps, and I was studying the GREs, and he would take the math section of the GREs over from me, and he would get every single problem right. And he was probably 14 years old. He could do anything. And you just find out that people at the end of the day are all motivated the same way. They want self-esteem. They want to be optimistic about their future. They would like to be in trustful relationships, but they find it hard. Maslowian hierarchy of needs applies in every single culture. I can remember the kids coming up to me and saying, "I'm going to go out on a date. Can I borrow your belt?" And I only had one belt, and I'd give him my belt for the evening, and they'd go out on a date and pretend it was his belt. And I can remember being humbled once in my very first week in the African village, and a kid came in. His name was Charles Twabe, who became a lifelong friend. And he said, "How many pair of shoes do you have?" I said, I have 2 pairs of shoes. I have my running shoes and I have my clodhoppers. And I don't know, I think clodhoppers must be a Scranton thing, because every time I say it outside Scranton, no one knows what I'm talking about. But you all remember the clodhoppers are the little work boots. So he said, "Mwalimu," which is the word for teacher, and they would sing it like that. "Mwalimu," he said, let me have 1 pair of your shoes. And I said, "No, I have my running shoes and then the shoes for everything else." They said, "But you can only wear 1 pair at a time." And I said, "Yeah, but," and I started to feel greedy, and I started to feel like I'm this horrible person because I have 2 pairs of shoes and he has none. And I said, "Yeah, but I'm keeping them. I need them both." And he said, "But I have no shoes and you have 2 pairs of shoes." And I'm completely flummoxed because he's totally right. And if I were a good person, I would make a choice. I'd either run in my clodhoppers or teach in my running shoe. I could find a way to do it, but I didn't want to give him my 2 pair of shoes. I'd only been there a week. I had 2 years to go. I finally thought I talked my way out of it. And I said, "You know what, Charles, I'll give you 1 pair of shoes when I leave, but I'm here to dedicate my life and build the school and enlighten everybody. But I'll give you 1 pair of shoes when I leave." And then he looked at me with the obvious question. He said, "Sir, Mwalimu, when are you leaving?" And that put everything in perspective. I was there romantically. I was still only 20 years old when I arrived. Imbued with a Catholic sense, a missionary sense, and I was going to help these people and save them and direct them. And I realized, most of them don't have no idea why I'm there, no idea if I can help or not. But if I could give 1 kid a pair of shoes, that would change his life. And if I had to leave, turn around after only a week in order that he get a pair of clodhoppers, that was fine with him. So that was a very sobering early experience, which I think informed, my advisory work for the next few decades. find out what they want, be modest, figure out what their vision is, help them achieve it, and don't think that you're going to do something magical and where the chief asks you to marry his daughter and they'll name a constellation of stars after you, because it's not going to happen.
Which pair of shoes did you give him?
At the end, I gave him my clodhoppers, and it's very funny. I also gave him my blue jeans, and I had 2 blue jeans. I gave him one, and I gave him one of my shirts. And what was funny is I kept getting notes from all the other students, of course, asking for things, but also saying that it's impossible to forget that I was ever there because Tuabe walks around looking like me all day long. So, okay. So Gus, do you remember me as your babysitter?
Of course I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It was
You had a profound influence on me.
yeah, that's good. It was a good group. It's a good group. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
It's I would hardly recognize you. Yeah. Sorry. There's the Fahey's.
But Michael,
Yeah.
he used to give him pizza. You lost money in that babysitting job.
That was my first missionary work. Yeah. But, yeah, we used to bring pizza over every time I would be asked. I loved going. The kids were fantastic. Were very well behaved. Your pretty little sister. Everybody was so nice to me. So I started asking my girlfriend Kathleen Flanagan. You might know her dad, Colonel Flanagan, and she and I would go over, and we'd bring big amounts of pizza, and then the Faheys would come home. And they'd see all the pizza boxes around, and then they would pay me, and they'd say, "But you must have just lost money on this." So it was those were good times. They only lived 2 blocks from my house, and it was fun to be with them. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, if not, we'll say farewell, but not goodbye. I hope you'll be back with us again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's nice to see you all, especially the faces I recognize for so long. I miss everybody in Scranton. And, haven't been back since the pandemic, but I think we're going back in the next few weeks.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.